Brian Musser, the Baptist Campus Minister at Drexel University, and this is Peace and Power Christian Fellowship. The peace of Jesus Christ to change your life, the power of the Holy Spirit to change the world, and we are working through our lesson on the Sermon on the Mount, Words That Change the World, and this is the final lesson in the series. This is lesson 9, talking about the right one. This is the concluding lesson of the series, and we're looking at from Matthew 7:13 through the end of the chapter in 7:29, and looking at how Jesus presents there are two options and we need to choose the right one. Now, put this in a little bit of context, wrapping up the sermon this way, and this is the conclusion. But we see an inclusio going on here. In Matthew 5:17 and 20, it says things like, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. For I tell you, unless your righteousness exceeds that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven." And then from Matthew 5:21 all the way up through Matthew 7:12, it talks about what it's like, what people are like who live, who dwell in this kingdom of heaven. What's that kind of being? And then in 7:12, it wraps this up again, putting an end, signaling that the body of the sermon is done and we're moving into a different part. So Matthew 7:12 says, so whatever you wish that others would do for you, do also to them. For this is the law and the prophets. You see that law and the prophets bookend a conclusio, signifying this is the start of the body. This is the end of the body of the sermon. And then Matthew 7:13 through 21 talks about this. Enter by the narrow gate. Not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but the one who does the will of my Father. So we've transitioned from this idea of what it's like to be in the kingdom of heaven, what is the person like who is in the kingdom of heaven, to how do you enter in? And basically 5:3 through 20, who can be blessed? 5:21 through 7:12, what does living in this blessing look like? 7:13 through 7:27, how do we become blessed people? Just to kind of move this is sort of the summary or a review of everything we've talked about. Anyone can be blessed because Jesus has made the kingdom of heaven available. That's the entire point of the Beatitudes. But we are blessed to be a blessing. That's the passage about salt and light. Then looking at it, in order to enter the kingdom of heaven, the way we live must be qualitatively different. The difference comes from a changed heart. Keeping the law is who we are, not just something we do. Religious practices become how we relate to God, not just to earn favor with God and others. That's a lot of 5:21 up through 6:18. Then this connection with God in heaven is more important than our security on earth. It allows us not to worry or judge others. God's blessing is something we can ask for. Since it is always available to us, we can freely share it with others. That's the 6:19 through 7:12 piece. So that's where we are. What it's like, we have to have a changed heart. We keep the law because of who we are, not just something we do. We live this way in the kingdom, but we still haven't answered the question that this is forcing us to ask is, how do we enter? We know what it looks like to have entered, but how do we enter? And that is what the conclusion is getting at. This conclusion is going to have several choices in it. And the first one is the choice of which path, which way, the narrow or the broad. So how do we get this changed heart? That is what this conclusion is going to talk about. We're going to look at the first idea here, and it's the right way. This is lesson 9, video 1 about this, and it's this idea of the narrow path or the broad path. And reading this passage, Matthew 7:13 through 14, enter by the narrow gate. For the gate is wide and the way is easy that leads to destruction, and those who enter by it are many. For the gate is narrow and the way is hard that leads to life, and those who find it are few. So obviously we see that this sets up two choices. The right path is narrow and hard versus the other way, which is wide and easy. There are few who find the right path versus many that find the wide and easy path. The right path leads to life, while the easy path leads to destruction. Question. This few find it. Many find the wide path. Few find the narrow path. Do you think Jesus is making an estimation of how many people are on each path? If yes or no, what is Jesus' point trying to make? And take this kind of with something we've talked about the entire series, is Jesus is preaching a sermon. He's grabbing people's attention. He's making some of these statements, not so much as to say this is the way it is think about this and develop thoughts on this idea. He'll make bold statements to grab your attention, and he's not creating a new law. He's using illustrations to grab people and get people thinking about this. I don't think Jesus is necessarily trying to give us a proportion about who finds the narrow path and who finds the wide path. That wasn't necessarily Jesus's point. But it's interesting to note, F.B. Meyer says this, in times when Christianity has been most popular, its real disciples have been fewest, which is fascinating. If we're talking about the narrow way and the broad way, if we feel like Christianity is the popular thing to be doing in culture, that kind of hints at something Jesus is speaking against here. Why do we feel like there are times where Christianity is popular and that is actually a good thing? And I think this is what's going on here, is not so much does Jesus want these few and many numbers, but the right path, you have to choose to enter in. It will not happen by accident. The way you get onto the narrow path is going to be a definitive choice. You have to choose the narrow path because it is the narrow path. You'll have to choose to follow Jesus because it is following Jesus. And going back to F.B. Meyer's quote, the times when Christianity is popular, there's a lot of people following Christianity because of just how it sets itself up in the culture, how it sets up itself in popular opinion, and they haven't specifically chosen to follow Jesus, to follow the narrow path. They happened upon the path by accident or by culture, or it's just the way things worked out. You see how that works? When we follow Christ, it has to be a choice. And I think that's the part Jesus is stressing here to his Jewish audience in the first century. You're not going to enter into the kingdom of heaven by circumstance, by happenstance, by just being born Jewish, or by just being able to wander past Jesus and listen to a few words of his, or just by being a randomly good person. You enter the narrow path by deciding to enter the narrow path. There has to be this personal choice. It cannot be an accident or by happenstance. But for he knows that in any case in which we do not just do it, we are to that extent exempting ourselves from the blessed reality of the kingdom. The narrow gate is not, as so often assumed, doctrinal correctness. The narrow gate is obedience and the confidence in Jesus to do what is necessary. It's this idea also that as we choose this life, we're choosing Jesus. We're choosing not just to assent or make some sort of affirmation about what we believe about Jesus, but to actually walk down, walk through, walk in light of those beliefs. It is not just an entrance. It's not a door. It's not a gate. It is a path. There is a gate, but it is a continued path that we must walk in obedience through. It is not this idea that we can just randomly fall on this path by assenting to certain things that we believe, but it must be a decisive lifestyle change where we decide to follow Jesus. So there's two paths, one broad, one narrow. Jesus is making the point that we have to make a conscious decision to follow him. That's the first example of how we get this changed heart. As always, there are 3 ways to join: in person Saturday nights at 7 p.m. in the Gimmick, or live Monday nights at 7 p.m. via Zoom, and then these weekly wrap-ups on YouTube and WordPress. I'm all over the social media: Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, WordPress, and YouTube. Those links are in the descriptions below. I enjoy having these conversations with you. Hope to continue them real soon.